What's up, y'all? This is Damon Young, author of What Doesn't Kill You Makes You Blacker, senior editor of Very Smart Brothas, a professional black person. And I'm here with the very moisturized creator of Random Acts of Flyness, Terence, Nance, and we're about to talk about some black ass shit. I want to start off by talking about just the concept of the white gaze, because your work deals with it a lot. Are we ever able to kind of subvert that?
In the context of like actually making the show or making any work, I'm never really thinking about like, well, what are white people gonna think, or like, what is the white executives at HBO or whoever I'm dealing with gonna think? It's not a super conscious thought, but I think how it plays out is like, you know, the extent to which we centralize the oppressor. Not even just the oppressor is always white people, because there's other people in the room, you know, maybe for the women in the room, the oppressor is men, you know. The extent to which we centralize the oppressor as embodied in white people is really seductive. Every stand-up comedian has a joke about white people where they do the white voice, you know what I mean?
Even using white people as a punchline still feels like you're centering them, because you are. You know, the first chapter in my book is called The Nigger Fight Story.
The what?
The Nigger Fight Story. And it's about how when I was like 15.
I don't know why I found that funny.
No, it is funny. It is funny.
That could have been really
no, you're supposed to laugh. And it's about how when I was 16 years old, I had never been called a nigger to my face before.
Oh, you made it a long time.
Yeah, I made it a long. I was in Pittsburgh, you know, and I hoop. So, you know, you don't want to call your point guard a nigger because you're not getting the ball.
Yeah.
My dad had these stories about white people that had called him niggers, and then he fought them, beat their ass. And so I wanted a story like that for myself. Like, you know what? I need to be called that so then I can have this nigger fight story about the time this white boy called me one and I kicked his ass, just to prove, I guess, how black I was. And even though this book, I'm trying to write like this very black ass story, I still lead off with that. I
started to feel the utility of engaging whiteness in a certain way, or calling attention to how much of a ballast it is in our day-to-day life, and how innavigable it can feel and is, and then if it is innavigable, the strategies you come up with to navigate it. The first one being obviously humor.
Yeah, it's like this behemoth. This is diet, and I don't even know if calling it a behemoth is like, it's fully capturing just how massive it is. It's like oxygen, where it's just there, and you don't even necessarily see it all the time, but it's everywhere you look. It's there. Or I won't even call it oxygen, because you need oxygen to breathe, and we don't need whiteness to breathe. So maybe gravity, where it's just like this force that is there, but you don't always consciously feel it.
You know explicitly it didn't always exist.
Yeah.
I think that's the hard thing about it, is it feels so
it's like manufactured,
and almost like a pop-up shop or something like that. But it's like, it's still going. Yeah. Like, wow, it still has like this really interesting utility that is not helping you, but it's so helpful for other people in ways that you're not participating in.
Random Acts of Flyness, it just really captures just that space between like the real and the surreal.
Part of the African diasporic experience is like engaging the quote unquote unseen. Mm-hmm. There's a mundane or banal affectation to how effectual that which we do not see is on our bodies and on our life and our experience. So I think like some of what, you know, about the show is phrased as surrealism, kind of to me feels like, you know, that's just naturalism. That's just like what it is. And I think even with like shows like Atlanta, or like even something like Insecure with her talking in the mirror, you know?
There's a lot of that. One of the things also that your show touches on a lot is just sexuality, masculinity. I think it was the second episode where you have a bunch of brothers giving each other dap at different points throughout the show, and then it ends, it like just meshes from dap into two men kissing each other. And you see that, and you kind of just see how kind of intertwined these things are. So what was the thinking behind creating that, and what was the context behind that?
All interaction, almost all human interaction outside of the idea of a gender binary has some sort of sensuality or sexuality to it, or denial, explicit denial of it. And I think that like that is difficult to process kind of inherently, you know, that like everything is coded with that, and even non-physical conversation, you know, everything is kind of being mitigated about, you know, by the specter of sex or sexual interaction. And I think that reality, when it comes into how black men or people who self-identify as men interact, is super interesting because of how culturally specific it is. Like, because so much of how homophobia incarnates is about having a violent reaction to the idea of two people of the same sex being together. But where does that violence come from? I think the idea of phobia is fear. You know what I mean? Like, it comes from a fear. And I think that it's misstated the extent to which that fear is like of the thing that's like, oh, there's people that are kissing over there, I'm scared of that. I don't think that's what it is. I think the fear is the fear of yourself.
Yeah.
You fear that I'm gonna be attracted to that. And I think one way to dance around it is complicated as depths. You know what I mean? And chest bumps.
Yeah, there's a chapter in my book, it's actually titled No Homo, and it's about how, you know, I guess you were in college around the same time, it felt like you could not have a conversation without beginning or ending it with no homo somehow. Like, that just came out of nowhere. I don't know where it came from. Everything was just like, yeah, I went to the store, no mo. Like, why are you even like saying that? There's no context for that right there. And so it was just like this farce where everyone is just performing.
The performance is finding ways to express the homoeroticism and the feelings of affection and love and closeness that are clearly there and valid and beautiful, but don't have a place. With patriarchy specifically, and, you know, machismo, and then how homophobia connects to that, it is, to me, the hardest system of oppression to understand how to dismantle, because the idea of it having a utility is so distant. Like, whenever it started, like, you know, with white supremacists, like, okay, we know they wanted the money and they wanted the land, and like, there's like a clear objective at play. You can kind of see the quote unquote logic, or at least the myopic logic in it. Like, so why did we do this whole thing where it's like we see women as property and like we have to like not hug each other? Like, what's the utility of that? You know what I mean? There's some part of me that benefits from male privilege, obviously. It's happening subconsciously, it's happening in all these ways. Yeah. You have to counteract it, you know? I wanted to ask you about like, kind of what we were talking about before. You know, you wrote this sort of like, this seminal piece, Black Men are the Straight White Men of Blackness. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Straight black men are the white people of black people.
My question is about the economy of getting credit as a self-identified male for an act in writing this or bringing this to light that in some way battles patriarchy.
That's a part of that whole conversation around that piece that I kind of struggle with. And I try to make it clear in there that I am not the first person to say this, that Bell Hooks has been saying this, Kimberly Crenshaw, even, you know, contemporary feminists like Jamila Lemieux, but my piece is the one that went viral. It still, though, is something that I do still feel self-conscious about a bit, because so many people, you know, want to talk to me about that and want to engage me with that and want, you know, email me or want to get me on panels to talk about it. And I'm like, there are so many other people who this is their work, this is what they do for a living, that you need to reach out to.
The trajectory of your quote-unquote brand and the audience that brand generates, and the conversation that audience may have been primed to have in reaction and criticism also of you kind of like repackaging this idea. I just wonder what you think about like that layer of it, of like the uniqueness of just whatever is what's happening around you and VSB.
I think that people who are familiar with me, familiar with my work, familiar with VSB, that was like, okay, this is Tuesday on VSB. This is what Damon decided to write today. Not everyone who is a fan or a follower or frequenter of VSB and my work agreed. Some people agreed with the content, but thought that the title was just too sensationalistic. But the most interesting and the most volatile reactions came from people who this was like their first engaging with VSB and with my work. Although there were a lot of creative conjugations of the word moist, in uses of the word moist, which is a terrible word to say, but it's an interesting word to read when you see it in many different formats.
It's a weird word to antagonize.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to be ashy.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That these are ashy folks. And so moisture is like, that is the prime antagonist in their lives. Like if they see moisture on one side of the street, they cross the street. And like you would see like, okay, this is what very moist brothers had to say. It's like, what?
Like, so you very cracky ashy.
Yeah. So we have lotion?
You know, like the phrase, you're preaching to the choir. I always find that phrase weird, especially being in church, because like the implication is like the choir already knows they're perfect.
The choir needs practice.
Choir needs, there are sinners in the choir. But as a team, we approach everything that we were making with the show as in community conversation that has value for anybody who's listening to it, even if they're not in the community. But the people in the community having the conversation, the choir, you know, we all need to like be in this kind of fun house, you know, reflective chamber of seeing and feeling and hearing ourselves to remind ourselves every day of the conversations we need to be having to move ourselves forward. And that will always have value. You know, like you can turn on to season 1 10 years from now, and like even if you saw it then, like, okay, let's have these conversations again. It's like it's not over. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That said, you know, there's gonna be a lot of people who come to it from outside and might have to Google shit, you know, and they'll have just as much potential for having like a choir experience, you know what I mean, at church.
And I feel like also that making the show or making any sort of content right now more specific, more esoteric is more valuable, because, you know, being too cognizant, too hyper cognizant of, you know, of people outside of the choir, of what they might think, ends up diluting the content and diluting the message. I just feel like the best way to get your point across and the best way to capture a larger audience really is to be as true and as specific to your experience and yourself as you can.
You got lotion and you live in the tropics. I'm so hard that I could be ashy for a week straight and like cracky ass elbows, but like I'm still good, you know what I'm saying?